and I would like to talk to you today about the written word. My talk is entitled, "What is a written word, and if so, how many?" And I would like to first talk about definitions of written words in alphabetical writing systems and why they are more problematic than they seem to be. Then I would like to talk about properties of written words, which we can deduce from the graphematic hierarchy from suprasegmental features. Then I would like to talk about correspondences to elements in spoken language. That will be very short. And finally, I would like to talk about writing systems which do not have interword separation. And there will be a short summary in the end. Now, defining the written word in alphabetical writing systems, you are probably familiar with definitions like in one. These are the most common types of definition. They go like this. A graphematic word is a string of graphemes that is bordered by spaces and may not be interrupted by spaces. However, although this definition is quite common, we run into some problems. If you see below, for instance, U with different punctuation marks, they do not seem to be a graphematic word according to the definition in one. And even if they were graphematic words, we could not say whether they are one graphematic word or three or whatever. Also in Smith with apostrophe or mother-in-law in hyphens, we do not really know what these things are. There have been alternatives to this definition, for instance by Zifonen et al. They said a graphematic word is a string of graphemes that is preceded by a space and may not be interrupted by spaces. So they shift the focus from both ends of the word to the end of the word, to the beginning of the word. Still, there are problems like the last line of you see below, U in quotation marks or U in brackets. Still, we don't know whether these are graphematic words, or maybe they are not graphematic words, but I think that is undesirable. So how can we improve that? I believe a typographic definition or typographic based definition would be the best. This is based on works by Bredel 2008 and 9. She divided characters and punctuation marks of a writing system, of an alphabetical writing system, into two classes. One she calls fillers. For us, the most important feature of fillers is that they can independently fill a segmental slot. And these are letters, numbers, apostrophes, hyphens. And clitics, they need the support of a filler. They cannot fill in segmental slot by themselves. These are periods, colons, semicolons, commas, and so on. So my proposition for typographic-based definition is a graphematic word is a sequence of slot filler pairs surrounded by empty slots in which at least one filler must be a letter. You see an example of a graphematic word according to this definition down below. You see 15 segmental slots, 13 of them are occupied. These are slots 2 to 14, and in slot 14 you see a clitic cliticizing on a filler, in this case W. Now, what are the consequences of this definition? Well, first, we can distinguish between a graphic surface and the graphematic word itself. Clitics are part of the graphic surface, but they are not part of the graphematic word proper. Fillers are part of the graphic surface and they are part of the graphematic word. And it is important to keep in mind that this is true for all fillers, including non-letter fillers. So let's see whether we can solve the problems we ran into earlier. Here you see the U with different punctuation marks. And according to this definition I presented in 3, we have exactly one graphematic word, which is composed only of the fillers. In this case, the fillers are the letters Y, O, and U. And you have different graphic surfaces. So we can answer these questions. We have exactly one graphematic word, but different graphic surfaces. In the case of Smith with apostrophe or mother-in-law with hyphens, we have only fillers. This means the apostrophe and the letter and the hyphens and the letters are part of the graphematic word proper. And this is quite, excuse me, this is quite important because the hyphens and the apostrophe have very important functions within the word. The apostrophe carries grammatical information and says there's something missing, and the hyphen signals that the morphological processing of the word is not completed after mother or after in, but that this whole thing is one graphematic word and should be processed as one morphological word. Now let's come to the properties of graphematic words. Another way to look at graphematic words is to consider the graphematic hierarchy. Like Demetrius just said, there are some suprasegmental units in alphabetical writing systems: the word, the foot, the syllable, the grapheme, and so on. And the word is a part of this graphematic hierarchy. What does it mean to be in a hierarchy? It means that every non-terminal unit of the hierarchy is composed of one or more unit of the immediately lower category. The consequences of this are that a graphematic word consists of at least one graphematic foot, and a graphematic foot consists of at least one graphematic syllable. It follows that a graphematic word has to conform to well-formedness constraints of syllable and feet. Let's have a look at an example, the minimal weight of graphematic words. I think we all know these contrasts, like the preposition in versus the noun in, or the particle no versus the verb no. And normally these contrasts are explained by the so-called three-letter rules. Content words must have more than 2 letters. But this is just a description. With the graphematic hierarchy, we can explain why this is so. A content word consists of at least one graphematic foot. And in order to constitute a monosyllabic foot, a syllable needs to have a graphematic minimal weight. Thus, a monosyllabic word needs to have a certain minimal weight. There are, of course, exceptions to the well-formedness constraints in 5 and 6. For instance, we see ill-formed graphematic syllables. Normally, we would expect in a graphematic syllable the presence of at least one vowel letter, but in Mr., Mrs. versus Doctor, we don't see a vowel letter, or we see ill-formed graphematic feet, like BA, MA number, in which the minimal weight is not met. Exceptions to 5 and 6 may be licensed, however, through special orthographic devices like dots or all caps. So these devices say these words may violate the constraints in 5 and 6. Now let's come to the correspondence to elements in spoken language. You see here 2 examples from German. One, wohlgeraten, which means something like great, outstanding, and the other one, wohlgeraten, probably guessed. So quite a difference. In the first example, you see no empty slots. It is thus one graphematic word, and it should be treated as one morphological word, or interpreted as one morphological word. And in the example down below, you see there is an empty slot between entities. So we have 2 graphematic words, and we have to analyze that as a syntactical phrase. This is what most studies on the graphematic word already pointed out. And this means, from a writer's perspective, you have to separate syntactic words by empty slots, and you have to write morphological words without empty slots in between. From a reader's perspective, it means that if you see a slot filler sequence without spaces, you have to interpret it morphologically. And if you see a slot filler sequence with spaces in between, you have to interpret it syntactically. You might wonder what is the case with English compounds, because on the first glance, they seem quite chaotic. However, it's not that bad. Actually, there's only little free variation. I found one example, although I have to admit that secondhand written without empty slot is a bit uncommon. But a study by Sanchez-Stockhammer showed that compounds are generally hyphenated or written without empty slots. Open writing most often is motivated by the avoidance of length. And you can see that using the hyphen or writing without empty slots can help to avoid ambiguity. So you can distinguish between blackbird versus the phrase a black bird. Or you can distinguish a furniture dealer who's old versus a dealer of old furniture. So it seems that the graphematic word in English also corresponds to the syntactic and morphological word, just like in German. Now let's come to which do not display empty slots without word entities. I believe the presented definition of a graphematic word is quite useful for most alphabetical writing systems. In some writing systems, however, there are no empty slots, so the definition in 3 cannot apply. And my claim is that this might be due to linguistic features of the corresponding spoken languages, or because of certain features of these writing systems. Let's start with the Chinese writing system. The Chinese character represents most likely a morpheme or a syllable. There are, of course, exceptions. For instance, in earthworm, neither character represents a morpheme, but those characters together are one morpheme, but each character represents a syllable. Approximately 97% of words in Chinese are 1 or 2 characters in length. The majority of modern Chinese words are bimorphemic, and still words are not marked by empty slots. This is an example sentence I took from Kulmas. You see there's no interword separation, but you can analyze it like this. So you have more than one, of course, syntactic word here. What are linguistic features of Chinese that might explain the situation? First, Chinese almost completely lacks inflection. Then, morphemes in Chinese can be free or bound, but there are degrees of freedom. So some morphemes can be freer than others. And the status of a morpheme as free or bound can vary by context, register, and dialect. So also, bound morphemes are more versatile than in English or German, because in Chinese, bound morphemes may occur before or after a free morpheme. And according to Chen and Hussein, these factors contribute to a fluidity of word boundaries in Chinese. There might be also historical reasons. In classical Chinese, Hussein and Li et al. Claim that we mostly find monosyllabic words and monomorphomatic words, and thus words and characters were almost congruent. Also, it's quite interesting to note that there was no term for a word in Chinese until the concept was imported from the West at the beginning of the 20th century. Note that the word for morpheme syllable character is unlike the newer word for syntactic word. There are also probabilistic reasons, as Li et al. Pointed out. The variance in word length is reduced relative to word length variability in alphabetic languages. So the number of potential sites within a character string at which word segmentation might occur is significantly reduced in Chinese, bearing in mind that 97% of tokens are only consisting of 2 characters. Therefore, decisions about word boundaries might be less of a challenge in Chinese than in English, if we imagine English had no empty slots between words. Thus, word spacing may have been less of a necessity for efficient reading in Chinese. Psycholinguistic studies show that if we add interword spacing into a Chinese text, it does not really facilitate reading times in Chinese. but it also does not interfere with reading. And it seems that inserting a space has different results in Chinese. Inserting a space after a word facilitates its processing, but inserting a space before a word did not facilitate processing. I will wrap it up in a minute. So let's go quickly to the Japanese writing system. The Japanese writing system consists of more than one kind of script. There are mainly two kinds of characters in Japanese, kana and kanji. Most kanji are associated with lexical morphemes. And going to the kana, hiragana are used most often for high-frequency morphemes such as postpositions and inflectional endings. And katakana are mainly used for non-Chinese loanwords. Because of the different scripts within the Japanese writing systems, readers may easily differentiate between content and grammatical elements. Kanji are also visual salient, as reading experiments showed. The word beginning is typically occupied by kanji. Thus, characters frequently appearing in the word beginning serve as effective segmentation cues to signal word boundaries. You can see it, I think, in this example sentence I took from Shibatani. You see in the first line, I added what character is what, the capital K for kanji, HG for hiragana, KK for katakana, and ROM for romaji. And you see that these, in the first line in blue, are quite effective cues to word separation. And there's also psycholinguistic evidence for the case of Japanese. Japanese readers or reading times are facilitated by interword spacing when reading text written exclusively in syllabic kana. But in a text that is written in the normal mixture of kana and kanji, spacing did not facilitate reading time. So to wrap it up real quickly, morphemes seem to be more salient than words in Chinese grammar. And in classical Chinese, morphemes, words, and characters were almost congruent. And thus, the morpheme or syllable is marked rather than the word. In Japanese, words boundaries are graphematically marked. Interword separation by spaces or other punctuation marks are therefore unnecessary. And in English and German, as representatives of alphabetical writing systems, words are salient units in those grammars, but they don't have graphematical means to indicate word boundaries, so they have to go to interpunctation marks such as spaces. So to sum it up real quickly, I believe with a typography-based definition, graphematic words can be defined in an alphabetical writing system. The properties of graphematic words can be deduced from the graphematic hierarchy. The graphematic word corresponds to the morphological and syntactic word. And writing systems without interword spacing most likely lack spacing because of linguistic features, or because they already have cues to word boundaries that make spacing unnecessary. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you, Abel.
Thank you, Martin. Any questions?
Yeah.
A question, a comment by Zerhandel.
Yes, thank you for an interesting talk. I don't remember the reference you cited. I haven't read the paper arguing that English compound words are usually only written with spaces to avoid length, to avoid excessively long words. But my own sense is that this is not correct. That there are hundreds and hundreds of examples, some of which I've just put into the chat window, of very obvious compounds. We know they're compounds semantically and phonologically And in many cases, they're parallel to words like bluebird and blackboard, but they're written consistently without spaces, like French fry, blue whale, oak tree, orange juice, black tea, and so on. So I'm just wondering if we really can argue, as you did, for a more consistent rule of spelling for English compounds.
You're absolutely right. The picture is a bit more complicated than pointed out by Sanchez-Stockhammer. Sanchez-Stockhammer actually worked on a computational algorithm to predict how you would write an English compound. And she has like an accuracy rate of 80% or something with this algorithm, in which she says like avoid length, but for other things, just hyphenate or write solidly. So we have an accuracy rate of approximately 80%. So of course the picture is more complicated, but this is like an approximation that if you find, if you are looking for a correspondent of English graphematic words, it's most likely also the morphological and the syntactic word.
Okay, thank you. I'm very interested in this, so I will look at it more. Thanks.
Next question by James Myers.
I have a very naive, ignorant question, but the use of actual spaces to mark word boundaries, is that something that was invented basically once? That was my understanding, that late Latin invented it and spread to Arabic and other systems. Ancient Egyptian had some other way of marking word boundaries, but it wasn't as regular. So maybe the problem is not explaining why Chinese and Japanese are different, but why most languages didn't think of this idea earlier themselves. Not just those particular languages. So kind of inverting your picture.
Well, I don't know whether I really got your question. My idea is that we use spaces because we don't have any other, we don't have a big choice actually. Somehow we have to mark the salient units of processing. In our case, in German, in English, it is the word. And we need somehow to do it. And so—
right, let me clarify. So, but Roman, Latin, and Greek were not written with spaces for a very, very long time. And then it was sometime in the early Middle Ages or something that somebody invented spaces. Arabic writing was invented after that. Those are the languages I know about that use spacing, right? Thai doesn't use it, and Vietnamese uses it morpheme by morpheme. But so the mystery is why, the mystery is not so much why languages don't put spacing in at all, but why it happened once, basically, in history, orthographic history. Somebody thought of this idea of putting in spaces. So it's not like English and German are forced to do it. It's, I don't know the history of it. So I'll shut up now because I don't know the history. So maybe somebody knows the history.
I don't know whether I can answer this question, and I don't know whether it happens only once, because if you look at Chinese writing system, Japanese writing system, they do have spaces, but not between words, but between other units. Like in a Chinese case, it's the morpheme syllable. So, but it's an interesting thought, yes.
Okay, the next comment or question by Amalia Granadesikan.
Yes, I was wondering if you've looked at Thai and Lao and Khmer and other systems like that that are segmental but lack word spacing still in the modern times.
Right. Actually, I did, but then everything would be even longer. Thai is quite intriguing, I think, and I looked into it a bit. And when I talked to Thai people, why do you not have spacing? They said, why should we? And actually, there are cues to syllables in Thai writing system. There are certain vowels which start a syllable. There are certain characters that end a syllable, and so on and so forth. So you can actually identify the syllable quite easily. And given that the native lexicon of Thai is mainly composed of monosyllabic words, it makes sense that you have quite good cues to syllable segmentation. So this might be the reason. So also it is the graphematic system of the Thai writing system that makes spacing between words unnecessary. But I have to look into it in more detail.
Thanks.
The next question by Sven Osterkamp.
Thank you very much. This is actually just a comment regarding what James Myers asked about. Just something from the history of Japanese writing. There's actually spacing, well, sort of word spacing attested in Japan prior to the arrival of the first Europeans to the country. So probably an independent development, not inspired by any Roman script-based model. So I would expect that the idea came up, and there are lots of comments already in the chat window now. There are many different strategies for word division or something similar, and it seems like it's a lot of independent developments, sometimes ending up looking the same and not really like a single development which spread all over the world or something like that. So it wasn't really a comment related to the talk. I'm sorry for for that, just concerning what James Myers asked for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And a last comment by Kevin Donnelly.
Hello. I just wanted to come in again on what Zev said, that there seems to me to be a graphic sequence in terms of compounds in English where you get something like, for example, ice cream becoming hyphenated. So you get ice hyphen cream, and then eventually becoming a single word like ice cream, with the separate words at the beginning of the sequence tending to have their own stresses, and the single one at the end tending to have a single stress. So that's maybe again something that should be considered when you're looking at compounds.
Yes, you're right. Like English compounds is really like a thing I will look into more closely. However, I think the general direction is there. Like if you write something without an empty slot, it really corresponds to a morphological word. And if you write something with an empty slot, the question is more open. Like, is this still a morphological word or is it a phrase? So this is quite. I agree. This is more complicated. But if it's written solidly, then it's a morphological word. But I have to look closer into it. So thank you.
Okay, Martin, thank you very much for that very nice talk.